So I've reacted to this video before, but I actually like this guy's reaction a little bit more, and I want to see exactly where he's going to be coming from on this video. So I'm going to watch this video, and then I'm going to watch a different video from Metatron that is on the similar subject. And I might watch one more about the Ronga Ronga script in Easter Island.
You know, one of the big arguments against the abolition of slavery in the 1860s is that, you know, when Europeans colonized Africa, they hadn't discovered the wheel. There's no two-story buildings. There's no writing. There's no written language. Missionaries had to go to Africa in the last century and invent it for the African people because they didn't.
So obviously he is wrong about just about everything he said, but I want to comment specifically about one thing he said, where he said that the people who are pro-slavery, their arguments they put forward was that there were no civilizations in Africa. What he doesn't realize is that this was seen as a very weak argument, as many Americans and Europeans had gone to Africa and they'd come back with information, drawings, and all kinds of things that had already proven that Africans not only were capable of civilizations, but they were capable of higher things. In some of the letters written, there is obvious inspiration taken from African networks, so how African kingdoms work into America. In fact, they discuss it, and obviously from Native Americans and stuff. And this is one of the reasons why it did get removed, because that argument was seen as very, very weak. And of course, back then, some of the people were arguing that Egypt was not a black civilization, and other people were arguing that Egypt was a black civilization. And so to some degree, they removed Egypt from the conversation altogether in order to see if there were other civilizations, and of course they found plenty. In one of the strangest turns of history, the Europeans themselves had acknowledged African history, and they basically took a lot of money to go find out exactly what was going on. Now, unfortunately, some of them came with very bad intentions. There are even examples of white writers like Shaw, who they say coined the word Nigeria, who they go against some black writers who claim that some of the civilizations at the time were first ruled by white people, and they overturn that and say, no, definitely they were ruled by black people, especially if you start looking at people like al-Bakri and stuff like that. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting to me to know exactly why someone would pretend to care, firstly, about this era in history, and then secondly, why they wouldn't do enough research. And the obvious answer is because they have a narrative to push. Now back to the video.
There's no recorded history. They didn't have writing.
So Egypt is not in Africa.
Well, Egypt is a different race. The Egyptians were not black.
Okay, but you said when they went to Africa, so I just want to...
The interior of Africa in the late 19th century, scrambled for
Okay, so
Africa.
we're now knocking Egypt out of Africa.
Well, Egypt is part of northern Africa,
Right, but
sub-Saharan
it's
Africa.
Africa. You said Africa, so I'm not trying to get a gotcha. I'm just responding. You're saying
Okay, sure.
Africa.
Yeah.
It's in Africa. It's Egypt. It's kind of ridiculous to say there was no written language.
Well,
so I'm just trying to get you to
Sure.
you know,
Egyptians are not Africans.
if I'm not pushing back, the internet will. So you know,
Egyptians are not racial Africans. When I say African, I'm saying sub-Saharan Africans.
sub-Saharan. Okay,
Black
say that.
people that.
So you guys already know how I feel about Egypt and the civilization itself, so I don't really need to get too deep into whether or not the ancient Egyptians had a significant amount of black people in their civilization. And also trying to knock black people out of Egypt is foul. But of course he will do that. I mean, I don't even need to get too deep, but we know that they will knock anything out when it's beneficial to them. They will talk about how Egyptians are like Middle Eastern people, but then those same Middle Eastern people try to go to America, then it's like, hey, we don't want these people here. It's like, well, aren't they part of the greatest civilization ever? And they go, no, it doesn't matter anymore. Because they don't actually care. They don't even care. If we were to prove 100% that Egypt was made by black people, that would not change how they feel about black people. Let's just get that straight.
Owens, you have the name of a queen, but the mind of a fool. How the hell are you successful, with all due respect? Huh? How are you going to invite this self-proclaimed racist, a guy who literally glazes over the mustache man, and just let him talk nonsense without doing your due diligence? Do your research. Be prepared, because he's going to lie, and his fans are eating this up.
So, to be fair, Candace Owens is one of those people who actually does talk about how there's no civilizations in Africa. So, I don't know when she started doing the turn of trying to be defending Africa. I mean, she didn't. But in this conversation, it's not even worth talking about because it's not that she can't do pushback. It's that she doesn't really want to. She doesn't want to defend Africa. She went out of her way to make videos for PragerU saying that there was no real civilizations in Africa.
Well, I'm not going to let that happen. First statement, the wheel. The wheel was first domesticated or created by a culture in Eurasia who first domesticated the horse. Yeah, they were on plains, on steppe plans. Okay.
So let's be first very careful about this. So Mesopotamia is the place where we first find the wheel. It might not be the first place that it was invented, but it's the first place that we know about that has the wheel. There are some suggestions that it's somewhere in where we'd call the Ukraine today, but that is not the first place we find actual wheels being used, especially in large scale. We find them being used in large scale in Mesopotamia. This area here is where horses are first thought to have been domesticated. Now, again, we have to be careful here because there is a difference between the type of horses that were used there and other places. Then, of course, we have other things to worry about outside of horses that were domesticated earlier that might have led to the domestication of horses. There is no doubt, though, that even though the wheel is an invention and the horse was a type of invention, the mix of the two, the horse and the wheel, therefore the horse and the cart, is something that is truly unique in history, and it did change everything. You know, people put it up there with writing because at this point you're getting fast, far travel. No longer do you have to send a message far away with a guy. A king can actually go from one place to the other and feel like it only took him a couple hours, so he doesn't need to send anything like that, servants or anything. And he doesn't have to ride some painful horse the entire time. He can literally just sit back. This was a different time. But we must remember that in India and in Africa, they had already been using elephants for this type of travel. Of course, elephants are not as fast as horses, but at least they come with a form of luxury.
They had the animals to use the wheel. They had the means, the landscape, the geography for it, yeah? In most parts of Africa, the wheel was useless. Yeah, there was many vegetation, the soil, many factors which was the reason why the wheel didn't spread. Most
rock art from Africa proves that the wheel had already been used round about 2000 BC in Africa, and it was not completely useless, as some people would say. And of course, you can always, till the land to make it more manageable and stuff like that. So it's not that the wheel was 100% useless in Africa. It's just who's going to do all that work when a lot of the kingdoms, first of all, that operated in Africa operated along the coasts. So boats were really what they were after. And then two, they had other alternatives, like the camel in the deserty areas. And when you go down to the south, you're looking at very mountainous areas. Even today, even cars, when you see them in Africa, a lot of the time, they're going up and down and up and down and up and down. So the wheel was brought several times to Africa, actually. Not discovered over and over again, just lots of people arrived in Africa who had the wheel. Luanda is a good example. So you have Portuguese, you have Arabs, you have all these people who could have brought the wheel 100 times over, but yet the wheel is not being used. Why is it that these people aren't using it as well? It's a very good question.
Cultures adopted the wheel. Not every single culture just created the wheel out of nothing. Okay? The wheel, ancient Egyptians didn't have the wheel originally. The Hyksos gave the Egyptians the wheel, or they adopted it from them. Then they innovated on it. Then the Kushites also adopted the wheel. So black people did have the wheel. But
one of the best evidence against the Egyptians being some Asian group is the fact that a lot of the technologies that were invented in Asia and were widely used only got there much later. For example, the horse and the wheel. Those inventions did not arrive that early in Egypt. And as a connected civilization, you would think that they would be there as soon as they can. And as he said is correct, that the Hyksos are really the one that made it available. Now, I wouldn't say they brought it to Egypt, but they definitely made it look advantageous to the Egyptians during the wars. And then after the wars, the Egyptians started utilizing it. And now we associate that sweet image of Tutankhamun riding a horse. And I think, one of the arguments of his death is that he died falling off of a horse, which is kind of crazy.
possibly the Axumites. Then in Central Africa, in Western Africa, you see rock art, which shows the wheel. Okay? Now, after all that period, when the wheel was introduced into parts of sub-Saharan Africa, it was used.
So, of course, what we know is that the Ethiopians had used horses and wheels as early as they were introduced. And it's not just the Ethiopians, of course, it's the Yemenites who also had the horse and the wheel, who used it as well. But the landscape, again, is a very forbidding one. And so even though the horse was adopted, again, it was not the best thing in the area to have a wheel behind you. Remember, some of these places that we're looking at in Eurasia and in the Middle East are basically deserty a little bit. And so they have a lot of flat plain, a lot of running ground.
What you're looking at here is from the Congo Kingdom, an illustration of an account which mentions the wheel being used to transport a religious vessel, I believe. Yeah?
So multiple Europeans have written about these wheeled vessels in Congo, and no, they're not to transport some religious item. They are funerals. And in the same sense that you can even see the funeral procession of a distinguished person of Congo. So in the same way that the pharaohs would get this huge thing going on in Egypt, in these places they would create these things, put their kings inside of put them inside of these things, and then drag their bodies. And the struggle is part of it, the struggle of dragging these to their funeral place, because they could just pick up the body and move it. The struggle of it is part of the funeral section of it, in the same way that pyramids are the same. And this is another image as well. This is another person, and they're dragging the person. So important people get these types of vessels. Now, again, they had these wheeled vehicles, but they didn't use them in the common world. They didn't care to use them in the common world. Look how small the vehicle is, and look how many people it takes to move them, because look how steep the ground is. Even if you look at the place today where the Kingdom of Congo was, it's a steepy area. It almost looks like human life was not supposed to exist in that area. And by the way, anyone who's ever come to South Africa knows that it's like that everywhere around the corner. It's like that. You got places which have like red sand and they're still steep, and then you have very wet places and they're still steep.
There's also this one from the Akan people. This is from the Ashanti Empire, I believe, specifically. Yeah. Then there's also this from ancient Kush. Yeah. The Nubians had the wheel. They used chariots. Yeah. Then, like I said, in Central Africa, Western Africa, they had the wheel, but it stopped spreading after a certain point because once you go deeper into sub-Saharan Africa, the landscape, the geography just means that the wheel became useless.
This argument is actually a fairly simple one, and whether you're in Africa or the Middle East, as you can see here, there are some places where you just can't go beyond. So in science, obviously there's activation energy, but there's also other things physically where there's a barrier, right? And activation energy is about the minimum amount of energy you need to go out over that barrier. And the real reason why wheels weren't used in a lot of these places, they were used, but the reason why they weren't used typically was because of the barrier of energy needed to go through these areas. You're not going through these areas with a wheel very easily. It's kind of a waste of time. Now, if you have flat plain, like you can see there in Iraq, rural area, this is kind of natural, the formation, then obviously you can just gallop your way through there. But in a place like Africa, where there's hills, especially since the people in Africa loved living on hills strategically, it's very difficult. And you saw with that image of the Africans that they were literally trying to pull a wheeled vessel over. Now, the question is, why did they start using wheels today then? If the wheel is so bad for Africa, why are they using it today? And the answer is because they had reached the energy you need to go over. So you've got rubber being used on the wheels. You've got the fact that they've got so much energy. A car can go anywhere. A bicycle can go anywhere. But of course, probably the dumbest part about this argument is the idea that Africans wouldn't have had access to the wheel. It's like, do you guys understand what international trade is? Do you understand that the Swahili coast, they ran into several people who would have already discovered the wheel thousands of years ago? Even if they didn't invent it themselves, they would have got the wheel a thousand years before the Swahili coast even became a thing.
People preferred horseback instead of chariots. Then it goes on to say sub-Saharan Africa did not have two-story buildings. I still don't get where this comes from. The archaeology, the historical accounts, the historical illustrations debunk that. What is this, bro? This is from Sudan.
So obviously they would never accept this image because, of course, it comes from Uranati area in Egypt and Sudan. So it's the border. It's in Sudan, but it's a border that was created in collaboration between Sudan and Egypt, which, of course, if they don't consider Egyptians to be black, then obviously they're going to say that it was the Egyptians who built it. This is a fortress, by the way, which when we go back in time, this fortress is occupied by Nubian people on its border. And of course, there's another fortress at the northern parts separating Asia from Egypt.
Yeah, this was a fortress from Sudan. Okay, this is more than one story, as you can see clearly. I'll show you an illustration from Ghana, going back to the Akan people. This is a pre-colonial illustration of Akan apartments. Yeah.
So when we speak of West Africa, we're not even being fair because West Africa has got some of the greatest architecture in the world. In fact, a lot of later architects borrowed the styles that come from West Africa because of how simple they are. They didn't overdo. I mean, look at these. These look like modern houses, but they didn't overdo things the way that a lot of European Gothic and all of those types of people, they put too much work in their architecture, whereas West Africa, simple, function first.
This scene you're seeing here is when the British came to the Akan people. This is after the kingdom was on the decline, yeah, and they came to assert their dominance. The people came out and said, we don't want that. Yeah, I don't know what happened after that, but these are the illustrations Europeans made showing the architecture that was there before. Another example is from the Central African region. This is the Palace of Wadai, yeah, of the Wadai.
It's very important to understand, of course, that again, these civilizations are very separated, right? Like, even though we're looking at these buildings and we're going, oh, where did they come from? You know, we can go and look elsewhere in Africa for multiple stories at West Africa, North Africa, Sudan, even in the Swahili coast, there are some which we'll talk about. And then, of course, the Kingdom of Congo. I mean, that one of the biggest buildings there is literally a multiple story building. And then, of course, Ethiopia has multiple story buildings as well. It's very important to understand that these are very different cultures, which tells you that Africa had multiple ways. It's not like one person created it and then they just all started copying it. But I want to see if he's done talking about other multiple story buildings in Africa.
Empire. This, as you can see, is over one story. There are many examples I can go through, bro. I've actually gone through others in other videos, so there's no need to go further in this, is there?
So this is the oldest standing building in Ethiopia, and it's the Temple of Yeha. Now, what's interesting about it is you can kind of see these things popping out of the building in the inside. Those are supposed to be beam-like things to hold things up. This would have been a multi-story building. If you look at rock cutouts in Ethiopia, you can actually still see them mimicking these poles that should be holding up the second story, but of course they're useless in this case because it's a rock cutout. This building here still holds that same architecture, so you can see that there is two stories, and in the middle there seems to be a wooden thing. That wooden thing is what they're mimicking in those buildings. So you can tell that not only are these temples old, but they're unique. They're double stories or multiple stories like nothing else in Africa. And obviously the one in the Wadai kingdom is also nothing like the one in Kumasi. The ones in Kumasi are nothing like the ones in Congo. The ones in Congo are nothing like the ones in Walata. So in other words, it is important to understand that Africa not only had multiple stories, but we don't need to keep explaining this to these people because they don't actually care. But the question keeps coming up over and over again all over the internet because some person who I forgot the name first said this, because I think they said mud huts can't get multiple stories, which is not necessarily true, but they were trying to say that Africa only had one story because everything was made of soft materials, which is not even close to the truth.
He goes on to talk about, there was no writing. Again, I've debunked this many times. The Kushites had Meroitic, yeah? Meroitic was used to write their Nilo-Saharan language.
So I've talked about this before. This writing thing is just a trap. It's just a stupid argument. Writing really stems from a few places, and some arguments can make the argument that it comes from one place on Earth. If we're only classifying writing as these type of writings, so this form of symbology in this sense, then the only three places that have been confirmed to have writing and are potentially origin places are Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Americas. Every other person seems to have adopted the form of writing. Now, China is still up in the air, but there it is. And the Indus Valley is also up in the air. We don't know if that's actually writing or not. Now, here's the second thing. Everybody from this point on borrows writing from every other place. Proto-Sinatic, everything. Europeans, I don't care. The Japanese, the Koreans, every other person borrows it. There's a chance that the Ronga Ronga script is a completely independent form of script, which we will get to, but we haven't confirmed that it even is a script. It might just be symbology in the same way that African symbology is symbology. So then, of course, the question is, so why did writing get to Europe before it got to sub-Saharan Africa? And the answer is, it didn't. The place which they call sub-Saharan Africa, in quote unquote, which includes Sudan for some reason, had writing, ancient Egyptian writing, as early as Egypt did. And then, of course, they adopted the writing of the Egyptians over and over again. As it changed, they changed too. Meroitic writing and all these other writings might be independent in a way, but they're certainly not inventing writing. The Akkadians never invented writing. The Vikings, the Greeks, the Romans, the Minoans, the Canaanites, Persians, all of these people didn't invent writing. They just twisted an old form of writing and wrote in their own way. These are not inventions, not in the traditional sense of the word. They're adoptions.
Which was Meroitic, yeah? Of course, the Egyptian hieroglyphics influenced the Kushites to create the Meroitic script. No doubt about that. But hieroglyphics also influenced the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians influenced the Greeks to create the Hellenistic Greek script, which influenced Latin, yeah? There's very few places on earth where you find writing without outside influence, yeah? His people, yeah, because I think Fuentes is Southern European, right? The Spanish, you know what I mean? The Iberians, they did not have their own original written language, and there's no problem with that. They had to adopt it from the Romans, who gave them the Latin script. Same goes for the Celtics. Same goes for the Anglo-Saxons. Same goes for other Germanic people. There's no problem with that.
So this gives me the perfect opportunity to talk about this. This is the Rongo Rongo script of Rapa Nui. Rapa Nui is the traditional name for Easter Island. Of course, this place is one of mystery because, of course, you know, who built these, who made that type of writing in quotation marks, and why did it only occur in one single area?
I recently discovered that the Rongo Rongo script of Easter Island is almost identical to the Indus script. Something very interesting to share with the viewers: is it evidence of IBC sailing expedition? We don't have the answer to this question. No question, the Rongo Rongo script is very similar to the Saraswati Sindhu script.
So actually we do have an answer to this, and the answer is there is no way in hell that the Rongo Rongo script is related to the Indus Valley script. This is India, and that is Easter Island. Now, obviously, the Indians were great sailors, but there is not even a little bit of proof that they were better than the Polynesians or Melanesians. The people who went to Easter Island are Polynesians. This has been proven over and over again. But the Rongo Rongo script has been found nowhere else but Easter Island.
It's like, let's see that, right? Okay. Rongo Rongo Indus. Okay, images. So if you look here, Indus Valley Easter Island, Indus Valley Easter Island. If you see the comparison, it's like almost identical.
So this is the image that he's looking at, and I don't know why the quality isn't getting better, but this Indus Valley stuff that you can see at the top is barely the writing of the Indus Valley, and then the Easter Island pictures you can see are also barely the Easter Island writing Rongo Rongo script. And again, you can see it over and over again trying to mimic the same script. So let's take a look at the Indus Valley script, the Saraswati script. This is what it actually looks like. Now, for me, there's no way this is not writing. And in fact, I can see where they would have got it from. So you can see that a lot of the one at the top, the very top, is made by a stylus. And it's very hard to imagine that this stylus form was not inspired by the Mesopotamian civilization, or a halfway civilization between that. So even though the Mesopotamian civilization, the style is the way it's written now, you can see it's like punched in, and you can see there as well in the Indus Valley it's got the same effect, either punch or carve, which is similar to what happened in Mesopotamia. When looking at the oldest version of the Mesopotamian script, it starts to become more and more obvious that these are fairly similar. I mean, look at the first one and compare it to the ones at the top, which, by the way, some people say that it has some similarities with the Chinese one, but I'm not even going to go that far. But if we stick here, you can tell it's punched in with a stylus of some kind, and it's supposed to represent these birds, fish. You can see the second to last one, images of fish and stuff like that. This is closer to this type of script, the Indus Valley script, than it is to any Rongo Rongo at all. This is what Rongo Rongo looks like, and a lot of it looks like it's images of people engaged in some level of intercourse, which is one of the reasons why it doesn't really come across as a script. But there's enough variety and subtlety in all of these for it to be a script, or at least a pre-script. If this is true, that's beautiful, but it's got nothing to do with India.
With some small, minor differences, right? So clearly, it's almost like a mirror image. The Rongo Rongo script of Easter Island is like almost like a mirror image of the way more ancient Saraswati Sindhu script. Is this evidence of Indians having sailed to Easter Island? Now, let's look at where this island is. It's in the middle, it's in the heart of the South Pacific. Let's go to Google Maps and let's go to the South Pacific. Okay. Rapa Nui. Where is Rapa Nui? Hangaroa?
I mean, look how far away it is. Now, of course, some people could make the argument that the Indians had contact with the Polynesians. The Polynesians then went to Easter Island, and the script was there, and suddenly there you go. The only problem is the Indus Valley script a script? We don't even know that yet. Is the Rongo Rongo script a script? We don't even know that yet. The communication would be speculation at best. And then, of course, we have to go even further and say that most of the Rongo Rongo looks nothing like the Indian script at all. Which, by the way, not looking like it doesn't mean it doesn't come from it. Just like if you look at alphabets today, they almost look nothing like ancient hieroglyphs, but we know they come from them.
This is Easter Island. Yeah, it belongs. It belongs to Chile. So if I zoom out, okay, if I place a pin there, sorry, if I zoom out, you will find that it's in the middle of nowhere. And how far is it from India? Let's measure the distance. Okay, from let us say from the east coast of India, somewhere over here, and let's measure the distance to here roughly. It's about 18,000 kilometers. 18,000 kilometers.
Yeah, that's a distance if you're traveling by plane. Now try getting there by a boat. Good luck.
But when it comes to Africa, it's a problem. Why exactly? Huh? We also have in Eastern Africa the Ge'ez script, which was, again, created in Eastern Africa. Yes, it derives from Sabaean, but it was created in Eastern Africa by Ethio-Semitic people in Ethiopia. Now, examples of written historical accounts would be this. What you're looking at here is called the Book of the Bornu Wars. It dates back to the 16th century when the Bornu Empire, I believe, was under Mai Idris Aluma.
So, of course, what they're talking about is nonsense, because obviously Africa has multiple scripts, Ajami script being one of them. The other one obviously is Ge'ez, as he has shown, which has relations to the Sabaean script, but the Sabaean script has relations to another script, which has relations to Proto-Sinaitic, which has relations to Ancient Egyptian, which it's like a circle from Africa all the way back to Africa.
This accounts for the battles and the wars which were happening in the Bornu region. You find many examples all over Africa, Western Africa, Central Africa, the Swahili coast, Ethiopia, the Somali, they all had writing, okay? Some adopted the Arabic script, creating what's called their Ajami scripts to write in their own languages. Many wrote it in Arabic. There's no problem with that because many historical accounts that we know of from certain parts of Europe were written in Latin. Is that a problem? Some of them were written in other...
So obviously this is how Africa is mainly trained in history, because of course other people have been tricked for a long time. One of the things, again, I have to say this because it's very important, one of the things that Africans fall for, and black people in general around the world, is invention has to be something you had made up without any influence from anybody outside your sphere of influence. So basically Egyptians can't have a touch of Middle Eastern. Otherwise, it's no longer African civilization. The Swahili areas, which I'll get back to in another video, that, you know, it was only Swahili to the Arabs. It was a greater area for the Africans. But we'll get back to that another time. But if it has a touch of Middle Eastern, no longer African civilization. People say, why you keep talking about Congo? Talk about all these other kingdoms that didn't engage with foreigners because they're falling for the trap, where the trap is you have to be 100% African, otherwise it's not African. And the answer is, where's that ever happened on Earth, where a isolated group invents something isolated and then they never come up with anything else? Now you could say Easter Island, but that's not an isolated group. Easter Island is related to the Polynesians. It's not isolated.
Languages like French, I believe, in Anglo-Saxon England. Is that a problem? No, it shouldn't be a problem because that's what they had. They had to adopt, then they had to innovate, which is what they did in Africa as well. So again, that's debunked. As for his comments about Egypt, listen, Egypt was a diverse region. Yeah, it's a very complicated history. Yeah, they had Natufian ancestry, Levantine ancestry. They had native North African ancestry. But if you look deep into their heritage as well, they have Black African ancestry as well. Yes, some Egyptians may not like that, but it's true. It's the truth. Look at the DNA. Look at Upper Egyptians today. Oh, you may say, oh, those people are Nubian. No, they're not just Nubian. Some of those people are Egyptian. They're native Egyptian. Yeah, just because they're darker, they're Nubian. That's not the case. Yeah, there is accounts also of Egyptians marrying Nubians. That's historical. Yeah, there's pharaohs who were marrying Egyptian wives with tattoos and stuff. I'll make YouTube videos on this, covering this, just to...
So you would think that buildings like this would put those type of questions to rest, whether or not the Nubians ever collaborated maritally with the Egyptians. We know that that happened over and over again. And even if you wanted to 100% separate them and say Egyptians are Middle Eastern, Nubians or something else, they claim themselves that they took wives from Nubia. So at some point, somebody must have been mixed at some point. But this doesn't make even sense by the old standards. Like if you go check, there's no way that all Egyptians are Middle Eastern. That just doesn't make any sense. And there's no way that these Middle Eastern people who are basically isolated from the other Middle Easterners, I don't mean isolated in the full context of the word, but again, the horse, the wheel was used hundreds of years in Asia before it made its way to Egypt, whereas anything that's invented in Egypt makes its way so fast to Nubia, it's not even funny.
Just to clarify, but yeah, Egypt, you find the various skin tones. Yeah? In the north, they're lighter, they're olive skinned. In the south, they're browner, darker skinned. That's Egypt. Egypt is part of Africa. Egyptians are African. Yeah, they're Afro-Asiatic. They're linguistically and partly genetically related to East Africans and also people further south. That's history, bro. That's history. That's all Candace Owens had to say. That's all Candace Owens had to say to debunk him.
So even that history, which I would call it standard middle history, there's still a lot of questions about what the ancient Egyptians look like and all of that. But even if we take that one, Candace doesn't believe that type of history. So you saw after he said they're not racially Egyptian, after that she didn't go, well, there's some other stuff in Africa. No, in her head, Egypt is fascinating. The rest of Africa is boring. Well, I wouldn't even say Egypt is fascinating. I'm guessing that even to her, Egypt is a pretty nothing state. I don't know if she even cares about anything like that. I think she just cares about Europe and stuff like that, to be honest.
But now he's using all that nonsense to justify, oh, yeah, this is why the people were like, oh, slavery shouldn't have been abolished and stuff. I'm like, God have mercy. That is atrocious. Atrocious. And this dude has followers. My God have mercy, bro. He said, he said a load of nothing that can be debunked easily. Yeah, this is why you need to know your history as people of the African continent. Yeah, so check out my YouTube channel, man. I've got more information. I go more in depth there. Yeah, don't be fooled by nonsense like this. Really got me triggered, bro. Really got me triggered.
The amazing part about all of this is that even though it's got him triggered and stuff, it shows how much interest black people can have to Europeans. Because I'll be honest, most black people I know, there's a small amount, most black people I know, they don't waste their time trying to overturn European history. Like, who cares? That is a big question for me. Why are they so obsessed with African history? Why are they so obsessed with African people? That's why it doesn't trigger me, because I know that, there is a reason why they keep thinking of us 99% of the time. That's because they see us as one of the biggest threats, possibly before or after Jewish people. And I don't know why they see them as a threat either.
Hey, if this is one of those videos where I need a helmet, I do need a helmet. So I'm just gonna go get, I need a helmet.
So this is a similar video, and it's going to be attacking the Robert Sapir video, or a fan of Robert Sapir, who is going to be talking about Africa in a very disparagingly way, but Metatron obviously is going to try and debunk it. Now, I promise to talk about most of the videos that he has made on Africa, but this is one of them that isn't necessarily going against but for, so we'll get into that one.
To my channel, this is the Metatron speaking, and today I would like to go back into medieval Africa, but at the same time discuss medieval Europe. And I want to do that because first, it's very interesting. I mean, how much time at school have you spent studying the sort of, for example, kingdoms that you had specifically in Africa in the medieval period? Because I mean, at the end of the day, when you think about, say, 12th century, if I tell you, imagine Europe, you know what to imagine. I mean, you're imagining the high medieval period, you imagine the castle, imagine the knights, the jousts, the war, crusades, you know what to imagine. But Africa, history is interesting at
So obviously, when it comes to Africa, imagining it at that time is very difficult for just about anybody, because a lot of people have no idea what it looked like. I mean, I will say that since the internet came and a lot of images have been floating around the internet, a lot of people are now taking back the true image of Africa. But before that, a lot of people, they just settled with Africa as just this place where history didn't start until the 1800s. You heard him there. The stuff that he said there, he generally thought, Nick Fuentes generally thought that that's like an accepted thing. Now, I've heard him debate against other Africans who have told him, like, no, there are other civilizations. I've heard him debate white people who have told him that there were other civilizations. And I mean right-wing white people. Like right-wing white people who don't believe in Africa being great, who, like, as I said, if you pay attention to some of those people, it doesn't matter that we have civilizations or not. If they don't like you, they don't like you. They're not, having civilization changes nothing, which is why some of them just accept it. They accept it, but they don't care. And I've heard him debate some of them who tell him, like, there's civilizations. Some of them even tell him that the Egyptians are black. I've heard that before, but obviously he puts that to the side and goes back to default.
A global level. And I'm interested specifically in the medieval period. So I want to know, in the 12th century, 10th century, 15th century, what would the world look like? Now, the reason why I said I needed a helmet for this video is because no matter what, even though this is a channel that is mostly based on passion, history, and interest for the truth and documented facts, there are people that whenever you choose a specific topic will bring in toxicity. So let me
So lucky for everyone, in those time periods, it's actually very simple to find the writings of the civilizations that existed at that time, which, of course, the civilizations at that time were documented by the Arabs and Africans, of course, and also some very rare Europeans who had come to those areas. Whether you're talking about from the 8th century all the way, well, I mean, starting with the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, you could talk about the 1st century all the way till the 1800s.
Define the purpose and aim of this video. This video was mostly inspired, or should we say triggered, by a tweet that I found on Twitter, or should I say X, that was specifically saying that before the arrival of us Europeans, termite mounds were taller than anything sub-Saharan Africans could build from an architectural standpoint. It's clearly an inflammatory tweet, possibly a troll post, and the tweet itself was only focused on South Africa. I'm not interested in that, because the comparison is not apt. 1. Termite mounds in their maximum height are absolutely impressive. 2. They're also taller than the majority of military structures in medieval Europe and ancient Rome. Thus, even if this tweet was true, it would not be the proof of any lack of architectural or building capability of any civilization, just as a matter of deductive logic.
So you will notice that now they've switched the topic from one story or multiple stories to height, which of course, if you go to Africa, tall buildings are easily found everywhere, ancient ones. The Church of Lalibela, which is actually perfect for the time that Metatron is speaking, because they're made in the 12th century, which is kind of crazy to think about it. This building was made in the 12th century. And a lot of people actually say it's not a building because it's a rock cutout, and a building has to be built. Outside of just the size of it, the fact that it is built for Christianity and it's built in the way that it is some other thing. You know, I mean, look at the size of that. The fact that it's cut in the ground, it's tall. Look at the size of the people compared to the building. It's just something else. It's no wonder when some people came here, they thought aliens.
But I think this is a great opportunity instead to do something else with this video, which is discuss the sort of architectural techniques, buildings, structures that Africans did build before the 17th century. Now, if you have played any civilization game, then there might be a few of the mentions here that you already know, such as the churches of Lalibela. Let's talk a little bit about the sort of structures that Africans built in Africa in the medieval period. And I don't like selective bias, whether it is one of those everyone was black and here is the proof, and if you don't...
Surprise, surprise, it's Robert Sapir. Before white European farmers established agricultural civilization in South Africa in 1652, the tallest structure were built by termites, not sub-Saharans. So the structure that he is showing is actually definitely not the tallest structure. That's about, if I had to guess, that's about 4 meters, just by guess. And I could tell you there's at least one structure in Africa that's about that tall, but we'll get back to that.
Agree, your racist types, I already battle those quite often on this channel, but also when it comes to other people that for some reasons cannot love or celebrate the wonders and marvels of European history without at the same time trying to look down at other cultures and civilizations and people, whether it be in Asia, whether it be in Africa, what have you. Well, already the...
Okay, so let's start with these Swahili mosques. So the Swahili mosques are about 3 to 4 meters high. that's about the same size as that termite mound that he was showing. So definitely it's not the tallest thing. And these mosques are not even the tallest structures found in that area.
The way it's written is not correct, because I would have put the W in white capital, just like I would with the B in black. Both capital. It's just me. A sneaky reference to this other video of mine where I discuss the instructions given us by the University of Waterloo in Canada that specifically asked us to lowercase the W in white but uppercase the B in black. To which I say, make me. Both should be capital is the based take. But yeah, I want to say that the statement is very misleading, maybe some kind of troll. But as I say, we will use it as a basis and then we will very much expand. And I want.
So it's what I call a serious troll, which means that what they're saying is serious, but they're still trolling. Obviously, I'm showing South African buildings that are quite tall. At the height, they are about 2 meters.
To show you what sort of structures Africans were capable of building, not only specifically in South Africa and also bordering lands, because I'm going to expand a little bit, I'll tell you why in a second, but in general all over Africa. So any building or structure that is being built after 1652, not going to be in this video, but anything before will be. No anti-white, no anti-black, nothing, just the truth. With that being said, the tallest mounds are actually impressive in their height. So have a little respect for the termites at least. There is nothing to indicate it.
So I actually want to talk about the termite mounds for 1 second. So when I talk about the termite mounds here, it's going to be very interesting. So some of the tallest termite mounds can be about 50 feet or 16 meters. This is pretty tall, and obviously considering how small a termite is, this is impressive beyond any African structure. I mean, if you compare this to the pyramids, right? Compare the size of a termite to the size of a human compared to a pyramid. It's not even comparable. I remember I've said this before on this channel, but if ants or termites lived on another planet, we would instantly call them a civilization. Like an alien civilization. But because we're very familiar with them, we just go, there goes those things again.
Any building skills before European arrived, unless you believe mud huts required skills. The mud huts are what was found when Europeans arrived. Okay, let me tell you this, Vincent. You think mud huts don't require skills. One, do you know what one of the building materials is that was used by my fellow Europeans in the medieval period, specifically in rural areas, to build their houses, together with twigs and thatch? Yeah, mud.
This is true for Egypt as well, by the way. The Egyptians who lived, in Arabian Egypt also, for the most part, not for the most part, but for the, let's say, normal population, built with mud. You know why? Because it's very difficult to get brick. And that's why the pyramids kind of look like they did, because a lot of people went and took bricks from the pyramids, which is kind of crazy. Having said that, of course, anybody who's an elite, both in Africa and in Asia and Europe and the Americas, tended to build their buildings not of mud, but of brick.
So I mean, mud huts, you make it. Because I certainly know I can't. You look at this as, these people.
So it certainly depends on which part of Africa you're in, but these type of structures are basically the same, built the same as how you build a brick, except it's a mud brick, where you form the brick and then you place them in a circle and then you build it up. As someone who has helped build structures like these, well, but it's definitely not easy. But I would not compare it to building a real house. Like there, you have to get real crazy people to build some of these things. Like some of these are built, in fact, I'm just going to say, in Africa generally, especially Southern Africa, these are built by females most of the time. That's basically their job.
people are so primitive. That's what you're thinking. So basically, by definition, you're also making medieval people and their sort of houses in the rural areas to be primitive, which were anything but. What I see here is human ingenuity. It's how human beings are able to build and construct a haven, shelter from the elements with what they had. Because I respect people of the past. I don't have to disrespect and think, oh, I'm so modern, I'm so advanced, and people that were using mud. Well, you're not able to do it. I'm not able to do. Give me mud, I'll starve to death in a forest, and I won't even be able to survive the elements. We, as modern people, have an overall understanding of scientific aspects and biology and things that the ancients had no way of knowing, but at the same time, they had skills, origin skills, survival skills that...
I mean, I would even go deeper than this to say, you know, can you build an iPhone? I mean, we are modern men, right? Can you build an iPhone today? Can you build a fan? Can you build an air conditioner? Can you build a charger? Like, if I gave you the pieces, could you build me a cell phone charger that will work? Can you build a shelf? I think a lot of people, they take our civilization, which is, I would say, a civilization where you have a few experts and a lot of non-experts, and then they try to compare it to an older time, which, again, you know, over there they had experts too, but don't pretend that it's just standard for the average human today. Obviously, we have a lot of more knowledge than they had back then, but let's not pretend that the modern world as we see it is something that anybody could do. I think it was Lex Friedman who said, someone who came on Lex Friedman who said, if we took a random amount of people, so let's say we took 10,000 people today who had no skill whatsoever in building a computer, building any of that stuff, and we got rid of every other human except that 10,000, how long would it take them to get back to the iPhone? And my answer is, they will never get back to the iPhone. That 10,000 will never get back to the iPhone. Starting off with no skill whatsoever in building iPhones. They know iPhones exist. They know it's possible. So they have an advantage. And my answer is they would not get to it. It will not happen. But if you take the thousands of years, eventually you're going to get to something probably even better than an iPhone. It's not modern man, is my point. It's got nothing to do with modern man. It has to do with the thousands of years of knowledge that has brought us to this point.
Only a very selective fraction of us has, aka the survivalist type. But I don't have it, so I'm gonna respect this, whether it be Europeans doing it or whether it be Africans doing it. And after having contextualized this, I would like to begin by showing you the structures, specifically in the military context, built by the Kingdom of Zimbabwe in the Middle Ages. Great Zimbabwe. Constructed between the 11th and the 12th centuries, Great Zimbabwe is the largest stone structure in the history of sub-Saharan Africa. In addition to its size, it was also built in a sophisticated and highly complex method, known as dry stone architecture. Dry stone architecture consists of structures built from stones that are quarried in such a way that they are able to be shaped to fit with one another as one does pieces of a puzzle. This technique enables massive structures to be erected without the use of any mortar, as was the norm in most other stone structures throughout history. Great Zimbabwe's dry stone structures were able to remain standing for centuries, relying only on the shape and weight of the overlaid stones as opposed to binding substances like mud, plaster or mortar, which crack and weather away with time. Important of note is the fact that the site is located hundreds of miles deep inland in a region inhabited by Bantu people, particularly the Shona. Numerous archaeologists spanning several decades continuously uncovered countless pieces of indigenous African art and artifacts in every layer of the archaeological record, as well as a number of foreign objects indicative of a kingdom with a complex international economy that reached as far away as Ming Dynasty China.
So while Great Zimbabwe is fascinating, Dombashaba is easily my favorite, and this is because it's probably tied to the Monomotapa. And the interesting thing about Dombashaba is it follows the same pattern that you would see in Great Zimbabwe. Now, what's really impressive about these structures is not their height, even though that was the question. It's really how wide they spread. In some cases, 3 kilometers.
This whole town can benefit from a tourist boom. But what's going to happen? So instead of preserving these wonders, this will be destroyed in a few years. So we need to spread the awareness. Please share this. Please like this. I'm not asking you for my benefit. I'm asking you for everyone's benefit. Like I said, there won't be anything left soon. Let's get this into the ether. Let's try and protect at least some of these circles. So we have this property developments here. And then, oh wow, have a look at this. Another cool circle structure here on the hillside. Okay, let's move forward in time and see if this is still standing. Alright, so this is still standing 2017. You can see the plants love this area.
By the way, there's so many of these that they still haven't calculated every single one of them. I think it was 2020 when they discovered a few more of them, because they're practically everywhere in Africa. These are from Limpopo, and again, very interesting, similar. This is Thulamela, which at Thulamela, the rocks can be pretty small and they can also be pretty large. But what really matters is how wide they spread.
Structures like this were endemic to a large region spanning as far as Zimbabwe, Mozambique and South Africa. To the present day, hundreds of these structures spiderweb throughout the countryside of Southern Africa, including complex networks of ancient agricultural terraces, irrigation aqueducts, cattle kraals and urban landscapes following a highly complex fractal layout. Unfortunately, only a small fraction of these structures have had any archaeological work or preservation efforts made. Sungbos.
Now, I wish I could say the reason why a lot of these are not taken care of is because there's not enough money. But there's enough money to do paleontology in South Africa. They're really more interested in like prehistoric, super prehistoric Africa. So dinosaurs and stuff like that, more than they care about stone circles and things like that, no matter how fascinating they are.
And the Great Walls of Benin. Similar to Western Europe, West Africa has an extensive history of ramparts and moats. The only difference is that those in West Africa were typically constructed from clay and earth, as opposed to those in Europe, which were usually made of wood and stone. The largest examples of these are Sungbos Eredo and the Walls of Benin. The Walls of Benin were created over a period of several centuries by the Edo people of Nigeria between the 8th century and the 15th century, and encompassed large swaths of the Benin Kingdom and the royal palace complex. These walls were described by the Book of Guinness World Records as the largest earthen structure ever created by man prior to the mechanical era. Sungbos Eredo was constructed by the Yoruba people between the years 800 AD and 1000 AD, and though not stretching as far as the Walls of Benin, they extended a distance of about 100 miles and reached up to 66 feet in height and surrounded the Yebu Kingdom with a deep moat full of trees and other heavy vegetation.
So, of course, if we're talking about West Africa, whether talk about Southern West Africa or Central West Africa, Nigeria is one of those standout areas where Niger from the top has civilizations going down, which are crazy. Walls are there, fortifications are there. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And then if you come from the bottom, you've got Cameroon, which has all kinds of walls and structures as well, which start to circle like those of the Kingdom of Congo, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Namibia, South Africa. And then you get to the Swahili coast, where the earliest ones are circle, and then the later ones are more like mosques.
The size and length of these walls, as well as the complex mixture used to construct them, was a testament to their engineering expertise, as earthen architecture is susceptible to deterioration from rains, as well as mud is. Sungbos Eredo being located in the rainforest region of Nigeria, large parts of it still stand to the present day, and in some parts retain smooth, pristine walls of immense height. As an honorable mention, I would like to talk about Bamum and Bamileke architecture. Primarily composed of wood, thatch and other vegetal material, but monumental and beautiful nonetheless. Let me know if you would like me to talk more in details about this on a dedicated video. Lalibela. The churches of Lalibela are a collection of 11 monumental structures built in Ethiopia between the 12th and the 13th century. They were commissioned by an emperor of the same name from the Zagwe dynasty who reigned.
So before he talks about that, I want to actually go back to these ones. Digit-B, which Digit-B is still one of my favorite areas because it's one of those unknown places where Europeans really just put a name, like a random name, because they didn't enter that area very often. And today we can kind of see why. There was like a sophisticated civilization out there, it's probably not allowing them to enter. And one thing that everybody has realized is how similar the building style is to that of Great Zimbabwe, which is crazy because we thought we would see that first in the Kingdom of Congo, but just above Congo, we're seeing it, meaning that probably the people of Congo before the Europeans arrived built in the same structural way that the people in Great Zimbabwe built. And that would be crazy that entire section, since we know there's some in Kenya, Tanzania, and all of that entire section built in the same style. And then all of a sudden you get to the Swahili coast and it changes. Ethiopia, it's different. Sudan is different. Nigeria, it's different. West Africa, it's different. It would show that all of these styles are somewhat unrelated and unique, yet somehow everybody did it
between the years of 1181 and 1221. Now, these massive architectural structures are unique in their constructions as they are not built from the ground up from quarried stone, as you would expect. Instead, they are carved out of one solid slab of bedrock. In other words, they were not built brick by brick or board by board. They were painstakingly chiseled from the underlying bedrock, methodically being shaped with precision and accuracy by hand, in an era long before power tools, of course, existed. Now, during the Crusades, Ethiopia became increasingly isolated from the rest of the Christian world due to the spread of Islam, and Jerusalem also lay firmly in the hands of Islamic powers. In response to this, Emperor Lalibela commissioned the construction of these churches in an effort to provide an alternative holy city.
So it's important to remember that the people of Aksum or Ethiopia were capable of building things this high. This is the part where I wanted to compare it to the termite mounds. These obelisks go all the way. I mean, really, they were trying to attempt to reach the sky. And you can see that there are rooms. So they're actually showing stories of houses. This was an attempt that you saw in those previous images that I showed you.
Site for Christians akin to Jerusalem, which had been fallen into the hands of Muslim powers. The traditional name of this site from Ethiopian sources calls it Warwar or Dabra Roha. Unfortunately, traditional Ethiopian sources don't provide much historical information about the origins as they attribute them to divine creation, likely as a way of garnering legitimacy. Look at this comment. While I understand the point you're trying to make, I fear you are overselling things a bit. The best you can say of pre-contact African architecture was the pinnacle of its achievement was a 36-foot high stone wall with no mortar, 36 feet of height for a defensive wall structure with battlements. It's exactly within the norm of the high end of medieval European stone walls. In fact, usually vary between 30 to 40 feet high. If you think that this isn't impressive, then you don't think that the majority of medieval fortresses are not impressive either, particularly city walls. It's just that in this situation, when he sees 36 feet high, he's thinking, that's not that impressive because these are African specifically. Now, I would like to try.
The real story here that we should be talking about is what are the pressures that we see both in Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Americas that forces people to build with these structures. Because remember, mud brick houses and stuff like that, they're actually perfectly fine for a house. You can make it more and more sophisticated to the point where it feels like you're just in a house. I've lived in some that are exactly like a normal house. Like when you're inside, it just feels like you're in a house. It's got windows, got everything. What is it that made us move to brick specifically? Why did we choose a harder thing to work with, even though it's longer lasting?
prove to you how sometimes information given may skew or alter our reactions, or should we say gut reactions, to specific structural and architectural patterns. Have you ever heard the word oppidum? The oppida were a specific type of defensive structure that was common in Gaul and created by Celtic people. The way these oppida were built, as they are described by the Romans, was very impressive, and it showed an incredible architectural and organizational skill that Celtic populations had in Gaul when creating defensive structures. Now, if you liked this oppidum that I just showed you, well, I was a little tricky. This is an oppidum made by the Gauls. The picture that I showed before, no, that's African. Yeah. Very similar, aren't they? But I know for a fact that the person who's writing this comment that we are reading would very much appreciate the Celtic oppida, but he would consider the African defensive battlement to be primitive and unimpressive. I say, clear your mind and then pass judgment. Also, a lot of the castra were not even close to this height when it comes to the Romans. Some winter fortresses, it's a little different.
So before he goes on, I want to say something that a lot of these, even though they were defensive, a lot of the times, I mean, with the stone circles in South Africa, you'll be surprised a lot of them were used to store cattle. Isn't that weird? A lot of them were just used to store cattle.
But not all will reach this height once again. Because at the end of the day, the ancient Romans were engineering masters. And one of the things that they did was make sure that the walls were effective. And, you need to be able to shoot people down there. You need to be able to see. There are a lot of reasons why this has become sort of average height when it comes to fortifications in China, in Japan, and again, all over Europe, because it's the most functional. Between 30 to 40 is absolutely plenty to make sure that people can't reach the top of the walls easily. And then, of course, thickness will vary when you have to deal with artillery. But this is not what we're talking about right now. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty impressive. And if anything, it speaks to me because it makes me realize, look, whether it be Asia, whether it be Europe, whether it be Africa, human beings are recognizing that, yeah, this is a good height, and so that's where we're going to stop. Also, the lack of mortar means absolutely nothing, because if you think that the lack of mortar makes it, oh, that's just silly, it's nothing, then you wouldn't appreciate all sorts of medieval Japanese castles, because all of those walls are made without mortar, all the way up to the freaking 16th century, never mind the medieval kingdom of Zimbabwe. And yet, I think those castles are absolutely impressive. The walls, the stone walls, and how they were put together by pressure and correct selection of stones makes it very impressive. The lack of mortar does not mean, oh, then this is just a primitive nonsense. It may be specific.
Another thing I think that makes a lot of people scared is the brick face. And even though a lot of the ones in Zimbabwe were brick face and a lot of the other ones are brick face, the ones at D get B, and the ones in the Kingdom of Congo, it's written by the Portuguese that they were plastered with what you call that? They had plaster over it that turned it white. But of course, as you can see here with this Ethiopian building, being brick face does not necessarily mean that it's less sophisticated in any way, shape, or form.
Choice, and even if it's not a choice, walls without mortar still work. Mortar is great. I think mortar was a fantastic invention, but let's continue. I want to show you a few other examples of selective bias, because I think on this channel I've shown several times the sort of selective bias that you get from those individuals that are pushing a sort of oftentimes anti-European agenda when they want to say, oh, the Romans were black, the Greeks were black, and this and that, and okay, we've already counteracted those very much, but I want to show you another type of selective bias, because at the end of the day, all selective bias is problematic. Here's one that I blocked, so I just unblocked so I can block him again, because this guy was as toxic as it gets, but he's saying, you're responding to a troll post, lame, but even if it was, people are believing it, so yeah, I'm responding, not lame. In fact, you getting mad about it is lame. But your post is kind of worse, he says. It is inarguable that sub-Saharan Africa lagged behind in develop all other regions on the globe, not just EU. Did they lag behind Europe in the medieval period? Yes, but no one is saying otherwise. But all other regions on the globe, and it's inarguable? As I say, this is absolutely a strawman, because that's not what I'm saying. And I kind of want to make it very clear here, because I know that otherwise those comments will appear. So let me make it clear. This is not a video about the top 10 most impressive stone structures in the world, because if I were to make a video like that, then 10 out of 10 would be European. If someone gets mad for whatever reason and they're not interested in African history and they're like, oh, so are you telling me that this structure in Africa you presented is as good as the cathedral in Milan? No, no one is saying that. Yes, I think that the splendor of whatever other castle that you like in Europe, you go and find, or this specific cathedral, yeah, they're more impressive, but that is not the topic of this video. So
of course, it all comes down to choice in terms of like top 10. But I think most people would put all 10 of them within the pyramids. The pyramids of Egypt are easily the greatest structures ever built by man, not only because we have no idea how they built them, but the number of rocks needed, the shape. Obviously, this brick face makes it look weird, but once it's colored in and everything and it has the plaster over it, you get a very different view of it. In my opinion, ancient Egypt has the best structures ever.
Am I allowed to respond to a specific statement and at the same time present for educational purposes the type of structures that were built in Africa by Africans, considering the fact that oftentimes, unfortunately, these are not shown to the world? And also considering the sort of comments that we have read. All right, number ones. Well, I hope that
So, of course, my second favorite in Africa would probably be the Ethiopian structures, but it doesn't matter. And then, of course, we go to the Swahili Coast. If I said top 10 in Africa, I should do a top 10 in Africa. Which ones would I put in my top 10? That would be very crazy. I think all of them would be in Egypt, though. That would suck. Let me think. Anyway, like, share, subscribe. It's free.